In this talk, we'll be discovering the center of Italy, Narni. Yes, it's a gem of a hill town. It must be a stop for you when you're next in Italy. After visiting Rome, you have about an hour drive to Narni, and then maybe another hour and 20 minutes north of Narni, you're up here to visit me in Assisi. We're going to be talking about the exquisitely beautiful cathedral, which hides some very, very intriguing works of art and memories of the past. We'll talk about in the third photo, you can see it, their extraordinary May festival, the Race of the Ring, in honor of their patron saint. We'll be talking about Giovanni. We're going to see the beautiful back streets, and we're going to visit the underground, discovered in 1979 with strong links to the Inquisition, which took place in Narni from 1555 to 1860, and people didn't even know that till about 2005. We'll see a beautiful work of art, the Pietà, many beautiful works of art. And on we go into Narni. It's a hill town perched on a rocky outcrop in southern Umbria, which has captivated many a visitor for centuries. As of 299 BC, the Romans had their eye on Narni. They knew it as a very important position strategically for control of the empire. At the time, this area was called Nequinum, and living here was an Italic people called the Austro-Umbri, an Italic tribe. And after it was conquered by the Romans in 299 BC, the Romans changed the name to Narnia. They did not want the name Nequinum because neque in Latin means I am unable. The town that was worthless, in other words. The Romans will call it Narnia. C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia, was fascinated by the name Narnia. He was asked by his biographer, Walter Hooper, why did you choose the name Narnia? And he was told, the name simply fascinated me. And then he showed to Hooper an atlas of 1901, in which penciled in was the name Narnia. The Romans settle in Narnia, therefore, and increase its potential as a strategic point, because as of 87 BC, Augustus Caesar will have the Via Flaminia built in 220 BC and connecting Rome to its empire in the east. It headed right out to the Adriatic Sea, to the towns on the Adriatic Sea in eastern Umbria. Augustus Caesar will have it paved in 27 BC and create a whole network of bridges over rivers as well. This is one bay of the Bridge of Augustus, built in the 1st century BC. And let me say right now, thank you, Marco Santarelli, for your photos. Thank you, Marco Minciotti. Thanks to Roberto Nini of the Underground, to Emiliano, to so many wonderful people in Narni who shared many, many secrets with me about their extraordinary Narni, and also many of them shared photos. So here we have the Ponte Augusto, massive structure of the 1st century BC. The bridge was 30 meters high and 160 meters long, so over 500 feet. But damage will come to the bridge thanks to a forceful earthquake in the 9th century, alas, and flooding in the 11th century. Final destruction of the bridge is about mid-19th century, just after Corot did his beautiful painting, The Bridge of Narni, in 1826. This masterpiece is in the Louvre. He also painted Narni the following year in 1827. Narni will become a favorite place of destination for a stop by those from Northern Europe on their grand tour through Italy. Artists, historians, writers, and so forth are extremely attracted to Narni. And as one writer said, And I want to read this to you. This is one of the reasons of the attractions of Narni. This was written by James Hakewill in 1816 to 1817. He was on his grand tour. He was an architect from Britain. He wrote, "There are few relics of antiquity that impress the traveler with greater ideas of Roman magnificence that the sight of this bridge affords." And the print you're seeing here, the ruins of the Bridge of Augustus, was done in 1864. It's in the British Library. If you wander the countryside of Narni, I want to move this a bit, you might see ruins of the Roman bridge. This is a photo taken by someone from Narni, Franco Spinelli. And if you're courageous and not claustrophobic, you may want to take a walk through the Roman aqueduct of the 1st century AD. There's 13 kilometers of Roman aqueduct. And Roberto Nini, and there he is on the right with his light, will take you through. You're going to meet him later. He is one of the 6 discoverers of the extraordinary Narni Underground in 1979. So this is the Roman aqueduct of Narni. It can go through about 700 meters, I believe. You're able to trek through this Roman aqueduct. Again, if you're not too claustrophobic. Stalactites hanging over your head. There are 4 bridges, which are also part of the aqueduct. This one, Ponte Cardona, dates to the 1st century after Christ. This is the period of the Roman aqueduct. And I've included this photo because it is very, very close to the geographical center of peninsular Italy. Giuseppe Angeletti, an impassioned geographer of Perugia, finally in 2006 is rewarded for his research by the Istituto Geografico Militare, which designated Narni il Centro Geografico d'Italia Peninsulare, the geographical center of peninsular Italy. Walk through Narni and look up, and you might see a massive Roman arch like this one of the 2nd century before Christ, arching over one of the streets. You must visit the exquisite Romanesque church, Santa Maria in Pensole, very simple beauty. Look at these columns holding up the portico. These are columns, we would say in Italian, of spoglio. Spogliare means to undress. So spoglio means you've undressed a Roman monument. You've taken some of the pieces. These are Roman columns pieced together to create the portico of Santa Maria in Pensole. In Pensole means on a slant, on a slope, leaning down. And I asked Roberto Nini, who discovered the underground and is an astounding young man, not so much anymore, but still for me, he is, of Narni. He went to the university, got his degree in archaeology. He knows everything about Narni. I said, in your opinion, why Santa Maria in Pensole? Because it's built on a slope? And he said, no. It comes from the word impensole in the sense of suspended. And I said, suspended over what? He said, it's suspended over a Roman cistern, which is in the lower level of this wonderful Romanesque church, Santa Maria in Pensole. It's a Benedictine church. And here we see the doorway, the main doorway, a doorway here on the left. And you can see that they're framed by beautiful sculpture in travertine. And I want to mention this doorway on the left first. Over the doorway are 2 eagles. They're the sign of imperial power. It's most befitting that they're on this Benedictine church. And that is because this church was financed with the donation in the 12th century made to the 7th century Abbey of Farfa, a Benedictine Abbey church in Latium, which was seat of great imperial power and favor, if you will. It once controlled 600 churches and monasteries, over 100 castles, and hundreds of villages. It received privileges both from the Pope and from the Holy Roman Emperor. So befittingly, on this Benedictine church are eagles, imperial eagles, sign of imperial power. And over the main doorway, where we're going to zero in on this fellow, over the main doorway is the abbot of Farfa at the time that this church was built in 1175. And I think you get a better view of him here. He has his hand up in welcoming. He's pulling you towards him. You'd expect an abbot to have his hand in blessing. This hand is more saying to us, come in, welcome. This is our church. You're an invited guest. Also on the door are these reliefs. On the left, we see a dragon, symbol of evil. Looking back at the dragon seems to be a terrified deer. The deer is the symbol of piety and devotion. And another relief on the same facade is another, again, dragon, symbol of evil. When you enter this beautiful Romanesque church of the 12th century, you notice the beauty of it, the simplicity of it. Over the altar is a 17th century statue of the Immaculate Conception. I'd like you to note the columns. They're holding up these arches, which are typical of churches of Narni, and only of Narni. You won't see them in Perugia, you won't see them in Spoleto, you won't see them in Assisi. They're called archi ribassati. Probably best translated repressed arches, depressed arches. They're also called segmented arches. That is, they're not full arches, typical, again, of the architecture of Narni. These columns are topped with capitals, and the capitals have wonderful images of allegorical figures. For example, this capital here, this is a man. He's in the arms of a lion. He's probably going to be devoured by the lion. More allegorical figures on this capital as well. In the 1960s, on one of the back walls, they uncovered some plaster that was coming down, flaking off, and they found some wonderful frescoes depicting saints of the 14th and 15th century. One of the frescoes shows Saint Lucy. She was a martyr saint living in Syracuse, Sicily. Her iconographic symbol are holding on a plate. She's holding on a plate her eyes. Her eyes were plucked out at the time of her martyrdom. The other saint is also a martyr. We don't know who she is. She's not holding any iconographic symbol that we can recognize, but she is holding a palm, symbol of the martyr. Another fresco shows another martyr saint. I'm not sure why she's depicted this beautiful blonde, because she was a Greek Lebanese martyr saint, Santa Barbara. Barbara was martyred in the 3rd century AD, and she's holding her iconographic symbol, the tower in which she was held captive. Another fresco is Saint Blaise. He looks rather stern here. This Armenian martyr saint, he's holding the iconographic symbol of his martyrdom, a comb, the comb used to cull the wool of sheep, because he was martyred by being flayed alive. When you head out of Santa Maria in Pensole, not far away is City Hall, also called Palazzo Comunale, 13th century, called also Palazzo del Vicario, who was an equivalent personage, an equivalent, shall we say, to a mayor. Now, I want to point out something over the door here. Here's the door. This kind of a door, this is a later door after the 14th, 15th century. It's rusticated, it's a Renaissance door. But let's look over the door. And what's the symbol we have? The griffin. Those of you who remember my Perugia talk will remember that the griffin was symbol of Perugia. As of the 12th, 13th century, it is also the symbol of Narni. Part eagle, part lion, king of the land, king of the sea. C.S. Lewis liked it too. Chronicles of Narnia presents this symbol of the griffin. And if you go in that door and look to the left, and I took this photo about 8 days ago. I went to Narni with Julia and little Milo. Walked in, there was a civic employee here going into his office, very nonplussed by the Roman ruins around him. He grew up with this, of course. Roman sarcophagus, probably 1st or 2nd century AD, tidbits of Roman columns. But the Roman remnants are everywhere in Narni. It is a Roman power for many years, a significant Roman power. And then by the 6th century AD, it suffers devastation by the Goths, Germanic tribe from the north, particularly the Ostrogoths. And then during the 9th to the early 10th century, Narni was a stronghold of and also threatened by the Saracens. Saracens was terminology used in the Middle Ages to the appellation used to describe Muslim Arabs. This late 17th century German woodcut gives you a depiction of the Saracens. As of the 11th century, Narni began to increase in wealth and power. By the 13th century, it's a strong force in the Papal States. Tribute to that, or testament to that, is the Rocca Albornoziana of the 14th century. Marco Santarelli, you might not be listening to me, but that's your photo, and thank you very much once again. And the Rocca Albornoziana was the work of the architect of Albornoz. Albornoz, Gil Alvarez Albornoz, was the papal delegate, and he was appointed by Innocent VI to restore security in the Papal States. This is just after the return from Avignon. And he was actually given an ironic epithet, this Albornoz. He was given the epithet Angel of Peace. It really is an ironic misnomer, given his future campaigns throughout the Papal States, leading a small mercenary army in the present-day regions of the Marches, Emilia-Romagna, Umbria, Latium. And he creates these fortresses throughout the Papal States as kind of a supportive backbone of papal power throughout the Papal States. Here he is, Egidio Albornoz, cardinal and papal legate. Rocca Albornoziana in Spoleto, mid-14th century, sign of papal power dominating Spoleto. Many of you who've been with me in Assisi have noted, we've noted, not always gone up there, but certainly noted and talked about La Rocca di Assisi, also Albornoz, fortress of the 14th century. The Albornoz fortresses were four-towered. They were also surrounded by the Albornoz fortresses. This one, at least in Narni, was surrounded by a moat and another outside wall to assure even further protection if needed. And as you can see, four towers around it, and then the keep in the middle. This is one of the towers with the beccatelli, and we call those in English corbels. All the towers are ornamented with the corbels. The central tower is called the keep. It's called mastio in Italian, and it was the most fortified of all and really a last refuge if that tower was attacked. This is one of Marco Santarelli's lovely photos from the mastio of the Rocca Albornoziana of Narni, looking down over the beautiful medieval hill town of Narni. Inside is the internal courtyard. And from the courtyard, there is a beautiful, elegant staircase leading to the noble residences above. For between 1370 and 1449, the Rocca was residence of popes, cardinals, and condottieri, the military leaders. Now, Gattapone from Gubbio, and you may remember his name if you were able to hear my Gubbio lecture, also built for the Pope in Narni, the Palazzo dei Priori, which is on the main square, the Palace of the Priors. The priors were the magistrates of the town, and under these arches there are frescoes, inscriptions, and coats of arms, which attest to the centrality of the importance actually of Narni in the area. And just to the right of these arches, we have a little loggia. You might almost call it a pulpit, but in Italian it would be la loggetta del banditore. The banditore would be the town crier. And it's from here that announcements and edicts are made, announcements to the people, legislation. And it is from this pulpit that the announcement is made that the festivities in honor of the patron saint, San Giovanale, are beginning, and that is in May. His feast is May 3rd, and you can see some of the drummers standing here in front of Palazzo dei Priori, getting ready to lead a nocturnal procession through beautiful Narni. Now, not far away, actually, from Palazzo dei Priori is the San Domenico Church. And the San Domenico Church hides an extraordinary treasure of Narni, discovered by these 6 young men in 1979. I don't know them all. I know very well Roberto Nini, and you'll be meeting him in my talk. I believe this was his brother Francesco. I know 2 of the guys were named Mauro. One of the fellows was named Massimo. I haven't met them. I met Roberto Nini on my first trip to Narni, which was in 1997. And I took the train to Narni, and in 1997, there was no bus from the train station for the 3 kilometers uphill to the town of Narni. And I hitched a ride with an elderly gentleman who took me up. And he showed me that Roman bridge on the way up. And I got into the town of Narni with my guidebook, and studying all the monuments and visited the churches. And then I saw a sign on a wall which said Narni Underground. And I walked down the steps and into the entrance, and that is where I met Roberto Nini, who gave me a guided tour and told me about their discovery, which I'll tell you about now. In 1979, these young fellows were spelunkers, and they had decided to dedicate more time to exploring the grottos, the aqueduct, and so forth of Narni. After coming across a grotto, I think he said down near the river Nera, that, by the way, is the origin of the name Narnia given to this town by the Romans. It was near the Nera River called the Nahar. So Narnia derives from Nahar, which was the name of the Nera River. You'll know this word if you were able to hear my lecture on Norcia and Kasha, all near the Nera River, as Narni is. And so the boys decided they wanted to find out more about the grottos and so forth of Narni. And they met one day near the public park, near the church of San Domenico. There's the bell tower, 13th century church. There was a church there even earlier than the 13th century. And they were going to scale this wall, but they were going to scale it on the other side. And Roberto was sharing his memories of that day, leaning on that very wall as he talked to myself and Julia last week. And he was reminiscing about that day. Behind him is the beautiful Benedictine Abbey Church of San Cassiano. And let us get a close-up of that for just a second. Something else to put on your list when you finally get to Italy and finally get to Narni, to see the lovely Benedictine Abbey Church of San Cassiano. Now we're going to turn to Roberto and this wall. And he was scaling behind this wall, let's say off to the left. He was trying to scale it with his rope, practicing his spelunking. And he was over a vegetable garden, and he slipped. And he fell on the cabbages of Signor Ernarni. This is an old photo of Signor Ernarni. He's deceased now, probably from about 1979. And Roberto apologized. Oh, mi dispiace per I cavoli. I'm so very sorry. Well, so sorry. I didn't mean to do it. And Ernani says to him, well, what are you doing? And he says, well, we found a grotto and we want to see if there are other places in Narni that have never been discovered before. And he said, if you're looking for treasure, you ought to go right over there. And he pointed to a wall nearby. He said, behind those thorns, there's a blocked up doorway. And Roberto looked, and the guys looked, and they could see the outline of this blocked up doorway. And he says, oh, some of the old people in Narni say that here there was a convent or monastery one time. And after all, we're right behind the church of San Domenico, right? And so they cleaned away all the briars. And one of them went in to this hole in the wall that they created. And Roberto told me recently, he said, I can't remember if it was Mauro, one of the two Mauros, or Massimo. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, he's inside and he shouts, oh, mamma mia. And then Roberto says to me in Italian, Anna, tu avresti detto, oh my God. He said, you would have said, oh my God. And we said to him, what did you see? And he said, un angelo. The angel is here. This is the space they got into in 1975. Let me show you the angel as of 2012. Michael the Archangel, and this is the church that they discovered. Now let's look again, 1979. Look at the Christ up here. 2012. So they knew they'd found their, so they went out, and Signor Narni said, well, did you find a treasure? And I think Roberto said something like, well, I think so. So these young 6 teenagers, Roberto was the oldest, he was 19. I think the others were 15. They worked weekends for 6 years, digging and shoveling. And then they got some assistance from the city of Narni. And I think 5 city employees worked with them. And they very soon felt that there was a link to this church with the history of the Dominican convent above. Roberto wants to get into the Vatican archives. And I said to Roberto, what did this do to your life? And he said, Anna, I sotterranei, the underground of Narni, they changed my life. I was in high school studying to be a draftsman or a surveyor. I went to the University of Rome to study archaeology after this. He got on the train every day and went to the University of Rome for 5 years. And he said, I became very convinced that we had to find more documents about this, and we had to get into the Vatican archives. The Vatican archivist at the time was Cardinal Ratzinger. Until 1998, there was no access to the Vatican archives. In 2002, the archives he needed to get into, particularly that he wanted to get into. In 2002, by that time, they're giving tours of what they're calling the Narni Underground. Because after they found this church, they found something else, and I'm going to take you there. But let me tell you about the church first of all. Beautiful frescoes here. The date, probably the 12th century, maybe sooner. They didn't know what to call the church, and they decided to call it La Madonna della Rupe. But later in documents in 2000, Roberto found a document that showed that the church was called Sant'Angelo, the Church of the Holy Angel. And he said, how befitting that right here, what do we find? The first thing we find is Michael the Archangel. And he said, it is Michael the Archangel who defends the good from that which is evil. Now, this has a lot to do with what they're soon going to find, eh? The defender of the good from the evil. So let's return a minute to the arch. I want to show you at the point of the arch is the Cristo deposto. And you'll remember what that means if you were able to attend my lecture on Easter, the taking down of the cross, right? And that Christ is called a Cristo deposto, the Christ placed off the cross, unnailed. Cristo deposto. And then we're going back here. We're going to see also the 4 evangelists. So let me show you one of them here. The winged eagle, Saint Mark, writer of one of the Gospels, patron saint of Venice. Another symbol of one of the evangelists is Matthew, the angel. Well, they dug through, let's see. They dug out here, and there was a door here and a wall. Oh, before I take you there, I want to show you something else related to the restoration. Let me see. We're going back up here. Look what they found. There's circles here, and they have symbols and names. And this marked the seats of the various Dominican monks who sat here. They found various levels of the floor. There's a fresco here. This is Christ crowning his mother, Queen of Heaven. So they dug also this way. It'd be to the left of the church as you're looking at it. They come to a door. They break through the door. There's a tunnel there. They can walk through the tunnel. There's a little bit of rubble, but it's not completely filled. And they come to a room, which they're later going to find in documents, is called La Sala dei Tormenti, the room of tortures. Tortures of people who've been declared guilty by the Inquisition, which the Dominicans held and took care of in Narni from the 16th century till 1860 and the unification of Italy. So they were given a chance to recant here, those accused by the Inquisition, accused of everything from blasphemy to bigamy to sometimes minor crimes. And they wouldn't always be executed. Sometimes they would be solely imprisoned in this little room, which the 6 young men break into. And what do they see? A small cell covered with graffiti of those who had been imprisoned here, particularly the graffiti of one person in particular. Look at, he put up here, IHS, the symbol of Christ. And then this is Il Paradiso Santo. He will not use the D, Domenicano. Wherever he wrote, D is replaced by T. Now, everybody, we could do a talk on this, but Roberto would have to do it. When you're with him, when you go to Narni, you can spend 20 to 30 minutes in here, and he's deciphering all the symbols for you. Absolutely fascinating. And this is one of the things I find on my first visit to Narni in 1997. Then when I directed the elder hostel groups in Assisi for many years, I can assure you, and I don't know if you remember Mary Carol, who you're listening now, one of our trips was to Narni and the Narni Underground. And here's Roberto Nini nowadays talking about the Narni Underground. And this plaque was up here when the church was still called Santa Maria della Rupe. The young boys decided to call it Our Lady of the Cliff, this 13th century church. And then as of 2000, so this was earlier than 2000, this will come down and it's now called Sant'Angelo. And this is the group today. The 6 young men who found the extraordinary treasure, the Narni Underground. It's Roberto's group too that takes you on tours of the Roman aqueducts. Now, after you visited the Narni Underground, you'll want to visit the Cathedral of Narni, dedicated to the patron saint San Giovanale, built in 1145. San Giovanale was a young doctor from Carthage, present-day Tunis, and he headed to Rome, possibly to escape persecution, but we don't know. And after his ordination, he was sent to evangelize, and he was later declared Bishop of Narni. Tradition tells us that he was a prolific miracle worker, and he even resulted in the conversion of 2,000 people in a single day. He died in 376 AD, and was buried outside the Roman wall of Narni, which is right along here, just right about here is the Roman wall of Narni. And Narni would be on the other side of this. This is Roman wall, maybe from the 2nd, 3rd century BC, all the way up to the 1st century AD. And San Giovenale was buried along the Roman wall. We're talking about outside of it, because on the other side of this is the downtown part of Narni. And this is the lovely cathedral today. His successor, Bishop Maximus, built a chapel near his grave, and using the money donated by 40 sailors, who they said were miraculously saved thanks to their intervention to San Giovenale to please protect them, their patron saint. And the chapel was probably the Sacello, or the votive chapel, also of San Cassio, who was the bishop who followed Massimo. And the burial place of San Giovenale will later be englobed into this cathedral, which we'll see. Notice again the depressed arches, the archi ribassati, typical of Narni. And you can see here the flags of the 3 terzieri, or the 3 different districts of Narni. The flags are out because we're close to the celebration of the Feast of San Giovenale, which is May 3rd. And there'll be many festivities in this cathedral, including the bringing of the candles to San Giovenale, the offerta dei ceri, the offering of the candles, the symbol of light, the symbol of esteem. And the people are dressed in medieval dress. The tailors from each district work months and months in advance. They research ancient texts, they research frescoes, and this represents the people of Narni. That is, it'll be the men who are in the processions offering the candles, because this tradition dates to 1371, the first festivities in honor of the patron saint. And it will include noblemen, religious leaders, castle lords, and so forth. They'll be on this side of the cathedral. On the other side, watching and praying, will be the dame, the noble women. And here you can see about to present candles to the Bishop of Narni today. These are dressed as representatives of certain castles. They have their banners, the castles surrounding Narni. So all the castle lords also bringing their offerings. This will be the night of May 2nd. On May 3rd, the reliquary of the 18th century, a silver reliquary containing some tidbits of San Giovenale, will be carried through the street in a morning procession. Now, this cathedral here, and I'm going back this way, had 3 naves. But in the 14th century, they're going to add a 4th nave. It's on the right as you go in, to include the Sacello, or the votive chapel, if you will, of San Cassio. It is called to San Cassio because eventually the body of San Giovenale will be carried to for burial in the crypt below the main altar, and in the Sacello will only remain San Cassio. San Cassio was bishop in Narni in the 6th century AD, and he is remembered also in this plaque up here, which I'll show you in a second, along with his wife Fausta. He will later ask his wife for reprisal, if you will, or pardon, and he will become a bishop, but he had been married. In front of the Sacello is beautiful cosmatesque floor. Cosmatesque is done by combining together mosaic and marble. Cosmatesque, as you may remember from a past talk of mine, is that kind of mosaic work. Probably derives from the Middle East, but it becomes very popular in Rome in the 12th and 13th century with the Cosmati family, Cosmati brothers, their father, and so forth. Now, we want to look at this relief right here, which is over the entrance to the Sacello. It's 6th century. It's the plaque here. The inscription dedicates this plaque to Cassio and his wife Fausta, 2 lambs and the cross and cosmatesque relief below. So if you, let's see, return here a second, you can see that to the left and the right of the entrance to the Sacello, which we should just call votive chapel, are 2 statues, 15th century. This is San Giovanale in Blessing. This is a beautiful terracotta Pietà. You enter the door and you're in a 17th century chapel, and over the altar are 2 frescoes of San Giovanale and San Cassio of the 15th century. And then if you go down the steps here, you're seeing the tomb. This is in sandstone, maybe 6th to 7th century, the original tomb in which San Giovanale was buried. But his body is stolen. It's stolen in the 8th century AD by the Longobards, and they take it off. They take it to northern Italy. And at the time of the theft of the body of San Giovanale, the Pope, who's John VIII and was born in Narni, threatens the Duke of the Lombard Duke with excommunication. The body had been spirited off to the city of Lucca. Threatened with excommunication, the Duke will return to Narni the body of San Giovanale, but not the bodies of San Cassio and his wife Fausta, who had also been spirited away. They'll only be returned to Narni later on in the 17th century. So the body is returned in the 9th century, was spirited away in 880, if I remember correctly, and then it is hidden away for fear of future thefts and not found until the 17th century. And then they again find the body of San Giovanale. He'd been hidden away at a certain point in the cathedral. As you exit the Sacello, if you look up, you can see a Christ in Blessing, a beautiful mosaic of the 9th century. This attests to the fact that this little Sacello probably became an important chapel, and then later will be englobed into the whole church. As you walk towards the altar, you'll see on your right this panel painting of San Giovanale in Blessing by an artist from Siena called Lorenzo Di Pietro. He had a nickname called Il Vecchietta, which is odd. I hadn't been able to trace the meaning of why Vecchietta, because Il Vecchio means the old guy, but his nickname is like the little old woman. And he did this image of San Giovanale and also the 15th century wooden statue up near the altar of St. Anthony Abbot. Also near the altar are beautiful pulpits sculpted in marble. The Virgin here, and she's flanked by the 2 saints, San Giovanale and San Cassio, is around the other side. Opposite the other pulpit, St. John the Baptist, with St. Peter is over here. We can't see him, and St. Paul. And this is the altar area today. Beautiful incised carved wooden choir stall, and San Giovanale's body, as of the 17th century, is buried in the crypt under the altar. And this is the tomb of San Giovanale now, a beautiful Baroque tomb, 17th century, frequently visited by the Narnese, and not just at the time of his feast. All this ornamentation was done, I'm sure, around May 3rd, the day of his feast. And before you leave the church, you don't want to miss the fresco near the door. Very unusual fresco. And I remember my first visit to Narni reading about it, and I wasn't aware of the history I'm going to tell you now, which I've learned thanks to Roberto Nini. I wondered why ever, and this was in the guidebook that I was reading, why ever would you see in the cathedral the stipulation of a civic contract? Because it's not the stipulation of a civic contract. It's the stipulation of the Statuta Illustrissime Civitatis Narni, the most illustrious statute of the city of Narni of 1371, when they are mandated that the patron saint San Giovanale must be feted with glory on his feast day, May 3rd, and the feast should include the racing of the ring. Horsemen will run with lances on quickly on horseback, carrying long lances, placing the lance through the ring. And this statute said there must be the race of the ring. Why were they deciding that the saint should be celebrated with prowess shown on horseback? This is to increase the military capacity of those guarding Narni. And there it is, as it is today. Now it is run on the second Sunday of May, and the three terzieri compete. This is the terzieri of Santa Maria. I can tell because their colors are the purple and the gold. And each terzieri has 3 horsemen. So there'll be 9 different horsemen, and they run many races around the track. And there's a whole complicated process involved in the race, and many, many events in honor of San Giovanale from the end of April to the end of May in Narni. Banquets, medieval dances, medieval music, medieval markets is extraordinary. And just imagine that this justing match of May, second Sunday in May, now in Narni, was depicted on their Palazzo Comunale in this relief of the 13th century. And during the month of May, the end of April, the banners will be hanging out for the 3 terzieri. Mezzule's banners are black and white. That's the area leading up to the fortress, La Rocca. The area around Santa Maria in Peninsula is the terzieri of Fra Porta. Their colors are blue and red. And then there's the third area, which is called Santa Maria. And this is showing you here the evening procession. These are the trumpeters of the terzieri of Mezzule, followed by their banners. These are some of the noble people of Fra Porta. This is the ring that was probably won the previous year. Fra Porta's colors are red and blue. These are the magistrates of Santa Maria, and they're about to lead the procession out, the evening procession, which will be the evening of the Saturday, second Saturday in May. And here you can see the passion of these people as they live this festival. There are over 600 people in medieval dress. And I think the best way to give you an idea of the glory of this festival is to just show you a tidbit of video here. And I'm not going to say anything, but it just gives you an idea of the events going on for the Feast of San Giovanale. There's history, flavors, celebrations. Passion, rivalry, commitment. Look at the serious faces. This is the race of the ring. So, next May in Narni, everybody. And this is the Church of San Francesco. all illuminated with candles for one of the nights of the Corsa all'Anello, this festival, the Race of the Ring. The photographer Marco has told me he took the photo and he said now it can no longer be illuminated because they decided the lighting of candles was damaging to the frescoes here. This is a church of the 13th century. I'm from Assisi, so let me tell you that even in Assisi, San Francesco had, even in Narni, San Francesco was very beloved. He was in Narni in 1210 on his way back from Rome, having had the oral approval of his rule. And he also returned to Narni in 1213. By then, and he'd worked various miracles during both of his stays in Narni. By 1213, the people begged him to establish a monastery in Narni so that he could frequently visit. And a small monastery was started. And the Church of San Francesco was built in the 13th century on the site, or very near the site, of that first little monastery where Francis and his followers had created a kind of little hut, just a little casuccia, the Italians would say, a little house. Now, to go to the Church of San Francesco, you want to walk up Via del Campanile, the street of the bell tower. And you'll be going past the bell tower of the Duomo, the cathedral, which would be just to the left of the photo. The lower level done in the 13th century, 12th and 13th. The upper level, and this is all pietra calcare, which means limestone. The upper level is brickwork, and this was done later in the 15th century. They also included beautiful maiolica plates in this upper level. And then you go down into a little back street and you'll come to the door of the Church of San Francesco with a fresco over the door, not very visible. And as you enter in this magnificent 14th century church, what catches your eye right away are the remaining frescoes on the columns. They're all done by local Narni artists. In the 14th and 15th century, their names are not known. None of these frescoes are signed. They depict various saints and above all, San Francesco, of course, because this church is dedicated to the saint of Assisi. San Francesco with the stigmata, the wounds of Christ in his hands, holding the cross. And you can see him here, and he's next to an image of the Blessed Virgin and the Christ child. The Blessed Virgin is also a common motif on these columns because many of these frescoes were ex votos. That is out of a vow. That means from a promise. In other words, thanks for a favor received or requesting from the Blessed Virgin that a favor be granted. And the intercedent most commonly invoked for an ex voto was the Virgin, because she would be the one who would speak to her son to answer your prayers. So the Blessed Virgin, Saint Francis, here's another image of the Virgin, probably an ex voto. In other words, commissioned by someone wishing a favor or commissioned as a thanks to the favor granted. This is a fresco of St. Thomas. And here we have a fresco of St. Anthony Abbot. And it's curious that in Narni, in the Middle Ages, St. Anthony Abbot was a saint in the desert. It said his only companion was the little pig. And in Narni, one could have and release in the streets 6 pigs to help clean up the garbage and so forth. But the pigs had to have rings in their noses so that they wouldn't destroy the pavement of Narni. This is part of one of the chronicles or one of the edicts of Narni. So Sant'Antonio, another image is Saint Benedict, born in Norcia, not far away from Narni, in the 5th century AD. And this is Saint Dominic, and he is next to an image of the Trinity, Father, Son, and there's a dove here, which is the Holy Spirit. Here you can see the Father, the Holy Spirit, and the Son. Saint Dominic here And this saint holding fish is Saint Andrew, brother of Saint Peter and a fisherman. And he's the patron saint of fishermen. Saint Peter is there too. And his iconographic symbol is the keys. I give you the keys to my kingdom from Christ. And the last saint we'll talk about is San Leonardo. He's a 6th century saint, Benedictine of France, and he's holding the symbol of his martyrdom, handcuffs. He was held captive. And he's the patron saint of captives who are those who are captives and held without just cause. And appropriately, I saw this fresco and noted it for the first time on a visit to Narni. And after I saw this, my next stop was to go to the Narni Underground to visit again with Roberto, the rooms of the Inquisition, where so many people were held without just cause. And I'd like to say this before I end. Roberto has written a book. By the way, please look at their website, the Narni Underground, also excellently done in English. I just finished his book that he wrote about all his discoveries, and this is extremely important. By 1998, they were really desperate to get into the archives of the Inquisition. It was forbidden. In 2000 or maybe by 1990, until 1998, no one could get into the archives of the Inquisition in the Vatican. In 2002, he was doing a tour of the Narni Underground. And the man he was doing the tour for, he could tell, he was speaking a bit of Italian, but with an accent. It seemed to be from England. He found out later that the man was from Scotland. And when Roberto told him, we are just desperate to get into the Vatican archives, to do our research, to find out more about the Inquisition trials here in Narni, he said, I was a Vatican archivist. I will get you in. By 2003, Roberto has permission to visit the Vatican archives and do his research. I think he takes the train 2 days a week to Rome. He researches in the archives for 2 or 3 years. In 2005, he comes across the document which tells him who the prisoner was, who in Narni wrote all that graffiti on the wall. Absolutely extraordinary for Roberto. And I just like to conclude by saying I have a tremendous admiration for him, for the young men who did what they did to bring to light all of this. And the story I'd like to conclude with is quite beautiful. It was in Roberto's book. A few years ago, a woman came to visit, a lovely blonde woman, and talked to Roberto, and she was quite astounded. And she told him she was a Dominican, I think sister. And he was surprised because he did not know Dominican sisters without their habits. She was an American. And she said, I would like to come. She called him later and she said, I'd like to come back with confratelli, which means co-Dominicans. And she came back a couple weeks later with, 8 to 10 people, I think men and women. And Roberto gave them a tour. And then they asked him if they could just stay for a minute in silence in the room of the Inquisition. And he said it was very beautiful. He speaks the minimal English, but he understood that they were all together joined and praying and asking forgiveness. Quite beautiful, isn't it? So what an adventure he has had. And I hope that you can all come to Narni very soon to learn more about San Giovenale, the Narni Underground, visit the Rocca, visit Santa Maria in Pensole, and join in the Passion of the Narnesi at their Corsa all'Anello Festival, the race of the ring. Mille grazie. And we will shortly unmute everybody and take questions. Before I do that, I'd like to remind you that it might be helpful, I think. You all might enjoy reading the last 5 blog notes because they have ample information on Narni. There is always too much to share in just 1 hour. Thank you very much for being here. Thanks very much to those who've made their donations, and mille grazie in advance to those who will be making donations so that this work can continue. Grazie. And thanks for being part of the community above all.